All right, sorry I had an interruption. The inside this big turntable area, there's a brake band that goes around, and it's got a hydraulic cylinder that can engage that brake so that the turntable won't turn. You really don't need to have that functionality. It's handy when you are first starting to drill a hole. So like when you set the auger up and you find a point on the ground and you start turning the auger, if you've got say rocks in the ground on one side and the other side you don't, then the rig, if you don't have that brake locked, then the rig's going to kind of wobble, and your hole might try to track off to one side. So what we do is we'll normally have somebody stand out here with this outrigger jack out, and they'll hold the tape measure from the outrigger to the edge of the Kelly when it's turning, and that way I can see the tip of that tape, and I can just adjust it back and forth as it's starting the hole in the top foot or two to make sure we don't get the hole off center, and that works good too. So that's really the only reason you need to have that lock, is so it would be a little easier to do that part of the job. Most of the time when I had it working a long time ago on a different rig, I never even use it on this rig, but another rig, I would normally just forget that I had locked it, and then I would end up, it'll turn even if you have it locked, unless it's, well, at least all the time I had it, it would. And so it just made it more likely to cause trouble with something else. So I haven't missed having that. But anyway, that's disabled. And so the hydraulic lever that previously controlled that now operates the hydraulic on the winch. All right, then you've got this big drum up here, and that's the inner Kelly hoist. And that basically picks up the inner Kelly and lets it down. This side, there's two clutches that run, one on each of the shafts here. The top one is a digging clutch, the bottom is a spin-off clutch. So normally, when you have clutches in like a truck or a car or whatever, then you've got a clutch that's engaged by a spring all the time, except when you push the pedal in and that disengages it. In this case, you have a normally disconnected clutch, so it's normally a neutral, and you disengage it when you want to use it. And so basically what you've got is, it's kind of like that ladder frame looking thing in there between the two shafts. That thing pivots around the bolt in the middle, and so when you pull the lever one way, it makes one clutch engage, and it removes the engagement bearing further from the other one. So basically this one, when you engage the top one, both of these shafts run the same direction, and the chain, it takes a normal path, so the chain is run the same direction around both shafts. When you engage the top one, it has a smaller diameter sprocket with fewer teeth than the one on the bottom shaft. So if you engage the top one, it sends less chain per time, and the bottom one sends more chain per time. So, and they both send the same chain to the same sprocket here, which this is the input shaft of the digging transmission. It has 3 forward speeds and 1 reverse speed. I'll talk about that more later. This is the output side of the digging transmission. It's a 2-shaft transmission, and it has 2 dog clutches inside. So you've got one dog clutch connects between first and second gear, and the other one connects between reverse and third. Reverse basically has a double 80 chain inside that goes around sprockets, and so the shafts run the same direction in reverse, and then forward the 2 shafts run in opposite directions with normal gear drives. And then it sends power through the chain here up the long chain to that intermediate sprocket, and then this is mounted on an eccentric. I'll talk about that in a second. And it sends power to the last sprocket, and the last sprocket is mounted on a pinion shaft that goes inside of the double gear reduction rotary pot. And inside of this you have basically 2 shafts. The bottom one has a ring that engages with the pinion shaft, very like you would have in a truck differential, except a lot heavier. And it has a real thin gear on the bottom of that same shaft that's I don't know, maybe 10 inches in diameter. It's about 1/4 inch thick, something like that. It has lots of little tiny teeth all around the edge, and it engages with a small diameter gear that has the same sort of teeth. It's maybe 2 inches or something in diameter, and it runs a little oil pump. And so whenever that chain out here is turning, it's rotating the shaft inside, which is rotating that oil pump. And the oil pump runs fast compared to the to the ring. It's probably 20 to 1 or maybe more that it runs that oil pump compared to the shaft, the speed of the shaft that runs that ring on it. And so it pumps oil from there at the bottom of that rotary pot to the very top of the upper section. All right, then you see the square drive coming out. You've got a 6-inch square hollow Kelly. I think it's about a 5/8 thick wall, and a 4 1/4 inch solid square inner Kelly coming out of that, and those telescope. And they run through a quill, which is, it's just basically the square hole that runs through that uppermost part. And around it has a giant bull gear that's probably, I don't know, it just barely fits inside that upper housing, so it's probably more than 30 inches in diameter, and it's about 6 inches thick from my recollection. And so what happens is the pinion shaft that you can see sticking out here with this big sprocket on it turns the ring. The ring is mounted on a short, heavy shaft. It's about a 5-inch diameter shaft from what I can remember. And on the top side of it, it has a small diameter bull gear, which is like maybe 9 or 10 inches in diameter. And it engages with that big bull gear at the top that runs around the quill. And so you've got about a, I don't know, maybe a 5 to 1 reduction after this ring and pinion set. And that's really the brilliance of this compared to this old style TD24 rotary pot that we had on another rig at one time. They had the same ring and pinion set, and they had the same power that would go to it pretty much from the rest of the rig, but it did not have this secondary gear reduction. And so that ring and pinion set would break like crazy compared to what it would do in this. And this one, it lasts real good. So, all right, you've got, let me talk about this side. All right, you've got 2 clutches over here. And you notice these are not the same size. The top one is bigger, and it is the hoist for the outer Kelly. The lower one is the Kelly down for the outer Kelly. So basically on this rig, what you've got is, you've got outriggers that go up and down and in and out, front and rear. You've got the rotary, not rotary, you've got the big turntable bearing that rotates the whole thing around. And you've got boom cylinders that go up and down to stand the derrick up. You've got the slide cylinder that makes the whole body of the rig slide forward and back. And you've got up here this funny looking cylinder. It has a rod coming out both ends. It's the crowd cylinder. And then you've got the winch, which is also hydraulic. All that's hydraulic powered. Then, so basically that's your up, down, back and forth, and all your leveling, and your small adjustment on your crowd and your winch. The other operation that you have is your up and down on the Kelly and your rotation of the Kelly, and that happens with clutches and brakes. So you've got both these shafts run the same speed, but you've got gravity helping you when your Kelly's going down, and normally you don't need to use this Kelly down clutch very much. Mostly use the Kelly up clutch, and that's why it's bigger. And it actually has, you can see it's thicker too. It's got 2 clutch discs instead of 1, like the other one just has 1 clutch disc, but that's a double one at the top. I think I'm saying that right. I'm almost sure that's right. I think I've only ever changed the clutch material 1 time on the Kelly up, and never on this rig. And we used that other rig for almost 20 years, so they last a long time unless you're really abusing it. But anyway, but it has a different chain path. So the chain goes around, let me say this, the 2 shafts turn the same direction, the same speed, but the path that the chain takes to go around the sprockets is such that it sends the chain one direction if you engage one clutch, and it sends the chain the other direction if you engage the other clutch. So I can't remember exactly how the path goes, but it goes around these two shafts, and there's a tensioner sprocket there, and then there's another sprocket back here behind that shroud. You can see the bottom leg of it here. The top leg goes over the top of this frame where the bottom of the boom cylinder connects. Anyway, so you got the power coming from the engine to the main shaft to these two shafts, and then it sends power from its sprockets through that chain into that sprocket. Then it sends power through that shaft over to this side, and you can see that between those two vertical levers, you see that hex bolt. That's the other end of that same shaft. And then up inside the middle, there's a brake drum, and that's where the brake is that you hold your outer Kelly still. All right, so then you have a chain that goes behind this shroud, behind my little cup holder there. You got a chain tensioner here in the middle, and you have another eccentric mounted shaft here behind this end of the shroud. And then there's a chain that runs off of the sprocket on the inside of that actually comes out of the frame of the rig where it's got the pivot for the derrick, and it runs up to the sprocket that's mounted, that big diameter one up high on the side of the derrick, and that connects to a spool inside of the derrick at the very bottom. I don't know if you can kind of see it in there. And that spool has two cables running on it, and basically what happens is that each cable connects to one end of that spool, and they wrap around that spool in opposite directions. So as you turn it one direction, it spools cable on, and since the drum is the same diameter along its length, it spools the same length of cable off the opposite end as it rotates. So basically what happens is the cable follows a path inside the derrick and through different sheaves, and at the top and the top of this Kelly. So you've got a swivel that's just below where those two sheaves are, those two whatever 12-inch diameter sheaves inside the derrick. And so if you can tell, the one on this side has the cable comes from the bottom of the derrick, goes over the top of that sheave and goes back down, and the one on the far side, it comes out of the top of the derrick, goes under the sheave, and goes back up. And so as you rotate that spool at the bottom one direction, it sends cable up over the one and pulls that cable. So if you're gonna put it down, then the cable that's over on this side, it'll get spooled on, and at the same time the cable on the far side gets spooled off. And the opposite end of those cables connects to each end of this crowd cylinder, which is mounted up here by all these leads. And so you got one cable that connects on this end, one cable that connects on this end. So you've got three things basically that can move. You've got the hydraulic cylinder, you've got the drum, and you've got the Kelly. And those three things can all move at the same time, or they can all be still at the same time, or you could move two. And so let's say you wanted to push real hard on something, but not move it very much. In that case, what you would do is you'd hold the brake still on this drum down here that's just, you can kind of see up in there below the derrick past the other side of the boom cylinder. If you hold that brake still, that holds the shaft still here, which holds the chain still, which holds the sprocket still, which holds the drum still. So you can hold the drum still by holding that brake still. And then you could say you had the Kelly where you wanted it to be and you wanted to push. Then while you're holding that brake still, you leave both your clutches in neutral and you activate your hydraulic lever. That makes your crowd cylinder operate. And if you move the crowd cylinder up, not the cylinder, if you move the piston in the crowd cylinder up, then that makes the Kelly go down. If you push the crowd cylinder down, or the crowd rod down, then the Kelly goes up. Basically moving opposite directions. And if you release the brake, then you can move the drum by one of the clutches. So you can either pick it up or put it down. So that's up and down for that one. And then on the, and I'll tell you about the controls in a separate video. The this drum here, the big one up in there in the middle, that is for the inner Kelly. You just have a clutch and a brake. So one, if you engage the clutch, it makes the Kelly go up, and if you let it go and you're not holding the brake, then it will fall as fast as gravity will pull it down, unless you have it pinned together with the outer Kelly, which you can see up here. Right now there's a rectangular hole in the outer Kelly, and then you can see a pin sticking through with a wire holding it in there, and there's an 1/8" hole inside that square Kelly. So right now they're pinned together, so they operate as a unit. So basically you can just control it with the controls for the outer Kelly, and then the inner Kelly just kind of follows it. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Let me talk a bit more about the drive on this inner hoist. You can't really see it, but behind that circular shroud at the top is a big sprocket. That sprocket runs on a shaft that runs through the middle of that inner Kelly hoist, and it has a chain that runs down. It's on the inside. It's kind of hard to see from down here. I don't want to climb up there, but it's basically this power shaft that is inside this shroud that comes off of the engine. It has a small sprocket that's maybe about 10 or no, it's probably 15 or 20 teeth. It's about, I want to say it's 7 inches in diameter, that goes around that main power shaft, and it sends chain all the time whenever the master clutch is engaged to make that big sprocket turn. And that big sprocket is connected to the inner shaft of that of the hoist. And I want to say there's an inner shaft, and then there's like a sleeve, and I can't remember if the sleeve is the same piece as the hoist. I've never gone into this one, but I've only ever taken the other one apart once in 25 years or whatever it's been. So as long as you put grease in it pretty often, they're low maintenance. But basically, let me climb up here so you can see what I'm talking about on the other side. All right, there's a brake band that you see on the far side, and there's a drum that's just inside the brake band. That's actually a clutch band. So whenever this thing is running, and whenever the engine's running and the master clutch is engaged, then that drum that's just barely inside the brake band, it's going to be turning. And if I'm remembering right, let me see if I can work it out as I'm describing it. All right, you see the big sprocket on the far side? That's an 80 single chain that's running around that one. Inside of this hoist, at the far end of the cable that you can see there, is a planetary gear set. So you got a sun in the middle, 3 planets, and then a ring gear. And the ring gear, you can see the housing of the ring gear that is visible. I don't know if you can tell it, but there's a grease fitting just below that cable on the front side of this thing right now that's visible. There's 3 of those, one for each planet on the inside. That's how you grease the bearings in the planets. So what happens is that 80 chain is running all the time whenever the master clutch is engaged and the engine running, and so it's turning the shaft that has the sun on it. That's the inner one here, runs all the way through. So this, you'll see this end turning a little bit when it's when the engine's going and the rig is going. And so when the sun is turning, then the planets turn the opposite direction from the sun, and they in turn rotate the ring in the same direction as the planet, so the opposite direction of the sun. And so when it's in neutral, when the clutch is not engaged, you're not pulling the lever, then what happens is the planets turn and the sun turns and the ring turns, but the planet carrier, which is connected to the spool that has all the cable on it, the carrier's sitting still. So whenever you engage that clutch to stop that drum, then it makes those planets run around on the inside of the ring. And then that is what makes the planet carrier turn, which is what makes the spool turn, which makes the cable pull in, which makes the inner Kelly go up. I got somebody who's talking to me. Let me pause this video.